We'd like to welcome our panel now for some political analysis. David Nakamura covers the White House for The Washington Post. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief at USA Today. Michael Crowley is the senior foreign affairs correspondent at Politico. And Ed O'Keefe is CBS's own political correspondent. Susan, let's start off with you. The New York Times yesterday got this 20-page memo from the president's attorneys laying out some of what their justification is, basically saying that the president can't legally be compelled to testify, and nor can he be guilty of obstruction of justice. Some are reading this as the president saying he's above the law. How should we understand this?
It's a pretty brash memo. We have a tradition of a powerful presidency. We do not have a tradition of an all-powerful presidency. And in fact, the genius of the founders was the system of checks and balances that we have. I don't know if the courts would uphold the view that the lawyers outline in this memo, but I do think even if they did, the final question will come down to a political one. It will come down to a question of impeachment, and that is what the White House is also focused on. Not only the legal questions involved here about whether you can keep the president from being forced to testify, but the political ones of whether you can make it less likely that he would be impeached regardless of what happens with the Russia investigation.
And Susan just said this is going to be a political question. You heard Congressman Hurd say it would be a problem, some of these things, particularly on the pardon front, if the president tried to do that to himself, something the president's attorney said unthinkable, but he probably has the power to do it.
He does, and it's as if this week he finally realized that this is one of those things he can do and in essence do whatever he wants with. The fact that he met with Kim Kardashian, the reality TV star, he last week pardoned Jack Johnson, the boxer, but only after Sylvester Stallone got involved. And I think, there's some concern here in town that this is a signal perhaps to, the folks that are under a legal cloud right now that, hey, if you ride this out, I'll take care of you on the back end. But Will Hurd said it's a potential issue. The House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, this morning also said he shouldn't go too far and certainly not consider pardoning himself were it ever to come to that.
The former Attorney General, Eric Holder, who served under the Obama administration, said he laid out that he thinks this is clearly the president trying to send a message to some of his allies that don't worry too much. You'll have a pardon coming your way.
Sure, you look at these pardons just from this past week, but also the pardon of Scooter Libby. I mean, these are big, bold moves that the president seems to be taking that are outside what had been established in the last couple presidencies as a process by which these things look less politicized. And the president, whether it's a direct signal or not, he's saying, I'm not bound by convention once again. I'm willing to take the heat on something like this. And that's very clear, not just to maybe the people in this probe, but others who are around the president who may be dragged into this who down the line.
Some may look at this, though, and the cast of characters, the possible pardon for Martha Stewart, the pardon of Dinesh D'Souza. Are we overreading this? Is it just randomness?
Well, no, it's also very political. I mean, these are people who support the president, who have attacked Barack Obama. So the president, it's about his politics. And so a system that had been politicized in the past, that previous presidents, most recent presidents had tried to make less politicized, this president's jumping right in and saying, I don't mind that. I relish a fight. I relish the backlash almost. We've seen that with his culture wars and all sorts of other decisions.
It also speaks to his personality, this kind of fiat power he has. You are pardoned. I am the supreme authority in the country. I don't care about how this was done in the past. I mean, it's very Trumpian. It's almost out of a reality show. The opposite of you're fired, you're pardoned. He loves having that almost kind of magical power and exercising it without anyone in Congress able to stop him.
Well, I want to ask you, Michael, the president's also going to Canada this week at a time when this may not be so welcome, given the tariffs he just put in place. Yeah. You heard the Canadian Prime Minister come out and say this is not only deeply insulting, it's hurtful and it's damaging ultimately. What is the approach here? Is this just about gaining leverage for NAFTA?
Well, I think that's part of it. It may also be partly politics, that Trump, as the midterms approach, and Trump is thinking about his reelection, he wants to show his base that he is taking clear, tangible actions to stand up for American industry against these foreign companies. As we all know, core theme of his 2016 campaign was that America is getting ripped off, both economically and diplomatically. So this is a way for him to follow through on that promise. And I do think if you look at Trump's record, going all the way back to the 1980s when he started talking about national politics, he does think America America is being ripped off. Now, loads of economists and leading political figures think that he doesn't really understand how these things work, but I do think that this truly motivates him, this idea that we're getting taken for a ride. I do think that, and so he's going to be a skunk at the garden party up in Canada at the G7, and he's opening himself up to strong counterattacks. I thought John Kasich actually had a nice line where he said, "It's not America first, it's America alone." That does seem to resonate, I think, with a lot of people.
Today, actually, you had the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haas, saying on Twitter that we'd gone from the G8 economies to putting Russia out for their bad behavior. Now it's the G7. He said it's now with the G6, and America is basically isolating itself. And I talked to a former Obama State Department official just yesterday for a story who pointed out that these tariffs came in on the same day that Trump is welcoming a top North Korea official to the White House and saying, "I'm not going to use maximum pressure anymore. We're talking well." So was that a timed on purpose or not? It looks bad to the allies. You're seeing not just Trudeau, but now finally Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe getting more angry with Trump.
But here's the risk. Republicans are terrified by it. The best thing Trump and the Republicans have going for them is this economy. Right. Yeah. 3.8% unemployment. That's a remarkable number that we got on Friday. And there's concern that getting into a trade war with Canada and Europe and Mexico is going to cost that remarkable economic recovery that we've seen. And that would be very bad for the White House, for the Republicans, and, by the way, for the country.
You know it's bad when the House Speaker puts out a statement that explicitly says, "I disagree with this decision."
But didn't mention the president's name.
Didn't mention the president's name and hasn't issued those kinds of statements in the past when he has done or said other things. When other senators call it dumb, when others say they're going to try to persuade the White House to pull this back, they know it's a problem that could cost them big time in November.
Well, we have so much more to talk about on this front, but I do want to take a quick break here and come back in a moment with more insight from our political panel. Stay with us. We are back now with our panel, and I want to pick up on this big question of what's going to be happening with North Korea. You've got the Japanese Prime Minister coming to town, a summit there. You've just had the North Koreans visiting the White House. David, you've written a bit about the photo op, the propaganda that the North Koreans won this week. Why does that matter? Well,
a lot of people say, look, a presidential summit should be a reward for steps taken before the summit. You've seen North Korea do some things like, shut down their nuclear testing, as you guys discussed earlier in the show. But people are saying they have not really formally committed to some sort of clear denuclearization process, and Trump's jumping the gun. He's starting with the summit. So now you have him going to Singapore for something this president thinks a lot about, which is the public display and the show. And the president seemed very enamored with the images of Kim Jong-un and the South Korean President Moon holding hands and stepping back and forth across the DMZ line. So what is he thinking in terms of that? But people say, look, you can't go too far. You're America. This is, moments ago you were name calling him. And so what are you going to do to sort of make clear that you're going to continue this tough, maximum pressure that you talked about and not go too far? North Korea used this kind of summit to try to say we're equal with the world's greatest power.
Well, Michael, I mean, the president's unpredictability, many would say, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who has been a critic of the president in the past, said unpredictability has been to his benefit here. And certainly just a week ago, the summit was off. Now it's back on. No more maximum pressure. The policy seems to be changing as we speak.
It does. It seems like the president is actually improvising this. And it's sort of hard to predict where it goes. But I think there is a school of thought that says that unpredictability frightened the North Koreans. It thought, man, the entire United States foreign policy establishment says you could never launch a first strike against North Korea, but this guy just might do it, so maybe we should start talking to him. The alternate theory is that this has nothing to do with that the North Koreans essentially got where they needed to be with their nuclear and missile programs and said, okay, we're ready to talk. And everything else was just noise, the tweeting and the bluster. On the one hand, what I think we saw from Trump, and David Storage was so good, talked about the photograph with Trump in the Oval Office with this North Korean envoy beaming as he got this enormous letter from North Korean leader, seemed very pleased by the size of the envelope. There is a sort of eagerness and enthusiasm that makes a lot of people nervous, that he wants this deal too badly. He wants to be seen as a peacemaker to shut up all these Democrats who have been saying he's going to start a nuclear war and end life on the earth as we know it. On the other hand, there was a note of realism, I thought, in his rhetoric where he said, look, we're probably not going to settle, not going to sell everything in one summit, and this may be the beginning of a process. It could take a long time, a process. Now,
that means something in diplomatic terms. That means I'm buying myself some wiggle room.
Right, and so a lot of people would say, well, duh, we've been saying this all along, but it does show that maybe some reality is creeping into his, what seemed like earlier belief that maybe you could snap your fingers and solve this problem. It's going to take years.
Ed, one of the problems the president continues to talk about, from his perception it's a problem, is immigration.
Yeah.
But yet you're seeing Republicans not want to move forward with a vote on this, at least Republican leadership.
Right.
As you heard Congressman Hurd say, he thinks they can force a vote this month.
So there's this procedural move in the House called a discharge petition that would essentially force the hand of Paul Ryan and compel them to hold votes on competing immigration proposals. Interesting that Hurd told you earlier that he thinks that will happen. The earliest it could happen, I believe, is June 25th. Our polling shows, that the Battleground polling out this morning, that immigration actually remains a top-of-mind concern. 51% of people want to hear a lot about it. It places it, I think, fourth among the issues. The problem is Democrats and Republicans want to hear different things about it. Mm-hmm. Democrats want to find a way to allow those dreamers to stay in the country legally, allow them to continue to contribute to society. Republicans are concerned that they're adversely affecting their communities, and they want to see tougher border security put in place, employment verification, and things like that. And I think it's just striking. Anthony mentioned it earlier. Nearly 2/3 of Republicans tell us that that with new immigrants coming into their communities, they believe it's adversely affecting them. That is why Ryan doesn't want this to happen. Because even if it passes the House with mostly Democratic votes, the president doesn't want it, the Senate doesn't want it, so you're creating a two-pronged problem. Conservatives will be upset that you allowed it at all and didn't do what they wanted, and then these moderate Republicans who are in the swing districts where they're going to lose this year are going to have to go home empty-handed and potentially lose their races. It's a huge headache for them, one they'd like to sort out, but they're not going to be able to, most likely, if recent history is any guide.
I want to get to, I guess, for lack of a better term, a cultural moment this week, and one that the president had some thoughts on. The comedian Roseanne had some racist statements she made. Her employer at ABC fired her from the program she had that was very successful. Then you had another TV network issuing statements about a comedian who works there who had some four-letter words to refer to the first daughter. I mean, it seems like the rhetoric can't get any worse, David. But why is the president talking about it? Why does this matter?
Well, the president has shown that he does not shy away from these cultural fights. I mean, we also had the NFL change the rules on national anthems, something the president took credit for. I mean, so you had just a few weeks ago, we were here talking about the White House Correspondents' Dinner and the White House taking umbrage to all the offense. But when it came down to Roseanne's comments, did they jump in and say anything? No, they used that to say, hey, the president deserves an apology for all these other things that were said by liberals and liberal comedians. So, I think that this is a sense that it's not just Trump, but obviously our culture and social media, people saying their inside thoughts out loud. I mean, these things are happening almost on a weekly basis, these big flare-ups, and I think this is a president who somewhat, obviously pushes those buttons and enjoys talking about it.
What has struck me about this, though, is the increasing willingness and expectation that corporate America will step up on these cultural issues. That if ABC has a star who says these offensive things, they are expected to take action. Or if TBS does, or if Starbucks has a controversy that involves racial profiling at one of their stores, that they are expected to do something about that. I wonder if it's even because a feeling that Washington is no longer able to respond in real time to some of these cultural issues, that we now expect corporate America to do that.
Well, or it's fundamentally not so much a political issue; it's always a business decision.
I would just
let me just ask you, Susan, on that. We were talking about the blue wave not being a tsunami. I know you had a conversation recently with former President Clinton.
I interviewed President Clinton and James Patterson. They have a thriller that comes out today, as a matter of fact. And I asked President Clinton if he thought there was a blue wave coming. He has some experience with waves since he lost control of the House and Senate in his first midterm election in 1994. He said a blue wave had been building, but he wasn't sure that it still was, that there were too many intervening narratives. And I think that includes this good economy and the prospect of what will look like a successful summit with North Korea, imperiling Democrats' expectation, the conventional wisdom that Democrats are going to win the House in November.
And that's what's so interesting to hear John Boehner also say there's no Republican Party. You've got that identity crisis on the Democratic side and the Republican side playing out here. Thank you for all of your insights. And we will be back in just a moment here on Face the Nation.